here we are, another very special episode of the Superhero Homies podcast. Today, not only do I have a very special guest, but before I even introduce him properly, homies, I want to get to know him a little bit more. You see, I have a very, very creative, very renowned, already writer, novelist, creator on this podcast here. But first, Douglas, I want to ask you, I've seen the background of your home here. It looks like a very lovely shelf, very, very lovely layout of random books and assortments. One thing I did see, did I happen to see a Darth Vader helmet up there on your top shelf?
Oh, yes. So I switched cameras. Right now you see the books right on the outside of this. There's a Darth Vader helmet, a Stormtrooper helmet, and a Luke Skywalker Rebel helmet. I've got the Queen. I've got all my figurines and comic books and everything back there as well. I just happened to zoom in.
That is awesome. First of all, I had to point that out. I saw that and like my eyes beeline towards that.
Right on, man.
So you're a Star Wars fan, I take it.
Yeah. The books definitely have the literary look, but like I said, right on the outside are all the fun stuff. So, I'm a Gen Xer. I grew up with Star Wars and Star Trek. I got into a pretty strong comic collecting phase, I guess you could call it, in the 90s. A lot of Dark Horse and Image comics. So I'm very much a movie guy. I love reading books too, but I think my love and my passion really come from the movies, and talking about the movies like with my dad or friends afterwards. So, a lot of pop culture.
No, I feel you on that. And it's interesting that you say that you like to have conversations with your friends or your family after you watch a certain movie. That's literally how this podcast got started. I was talking with one of my friends one day, and I was like, we saw something. It might have been the first Kingsman movie. I don't know. It was something we saw.
Oh, yeah.
And we were talking about it, and it hit me. I was like, man, we have so many of these fun and candid, yet somehow accidentally kind of introspective conversations. What if we just recorded those one day? And then one day I just say, you know what? Why not? And so it just kind of started from there. I think that those conversations that you mentioned that you have with like your friends or your family, those are some of the best conversations sometimes because, it's so much fun that way.
Well, yeah. And, you're taking the story. You're not taking the story at face value. You're digging deeper. You're exploring it, and it's amazing sometimes what comes out of those conversations. And to the point where you can't watch the film the same way. You start analyzing it one way, and you're like, oh my God, you know what that means? That means that he's turning against the group like now. So a lot can happen in those conversations, and I get like real fulfillment from it. And it obviously sounds like you do too, especially if you decided to start a podcast in order to almost formalize it, and I think people benefit from listening to those types of conversations.
Oh yeah. And above all else, it's just so much fun, But, I wanted to ask you this, and then we're going to get things started proper here. I saw your Star Wars memorabilia, and it got me thinking. My co-host Caleb, he's also a huge Star Wars fan, a bigger Star Wars fan than I am, and he had seen the show Acolyte. I hadn't gotten around to watching it yet. He is on the camp of people who really, really thoroughly enjoy the show. Now, I haven't seen the show yet, so I don't have an opinion one way or another. But I do have other friends who think not so highly of the show. I wanted to know, had you seen any of it, and what are your thoughts?
I saw the first 3 episodes and I did not like it. But believe it or not, I didn't like it for a lot of the reasons that a lot of people were complaining about. I just thought it was very inferior writing and very almost amateur in its approach to how to tell a story. And I just couldn't get into it. I didn't feel invested in the characters. So, I try to stay away from extracurricular criticism. I try to stay focused on the storytelling. And that show, it just didn't seem to have it. It didn't bring it. And I just couldn't get into it because of that. But there's other, that's not the only Disney Star Wars show that's happened, so it's not like The Acolyte is totally unique as something that, was a little disconnected or perhaps a little shoddy in terms of how, I'm a big Ahsoka Tano fan. And I loved the Clone Wars, the animated series. I loved it. But I really struggled to get into the TV series that they put out, which broke my heart because she was one of my favorite characters. So again, I wasn't a big fan of The Acolyte, but I disclaimer, I didn't make it all the way to the end. I got about 3 episodes in. So
I gotta be honest, you gave it a fair shot.
Yeah, I three episodes. I think is if you get that deep and you're not into it, I think at that point you could call it. Mm-hmm. And I get frustrated sometimes with people who haven't seen it at all and then condemn it. I don't think that's fair. I think you could just say the show's not for me and don't watch it, but it's tough to criticize it if you haven't seen it.
Yeah, and I'm right there with you. And honestly, that's something that I had to kind of grow into as a podcaster. I'm not afraid to admit.
Oh, yeah.
I had to grow into that. And man, I'm so much better off for it. I'm so much more at peace for it,
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
well, and another thing is I don't get mad at people who did like it. You know, I don't think that they don't understand something or like only I get it. Like it never used to be a problem, right? Mm-hmm. Like I'd be like, yeah, I like this, and you'd say I didn't. I'd be like, oh, cool, and then we might talk about, and it's still like communal, like it's still part of like loving Star Wars. Today, it must be a social media thing, but people are. It's like if you like it and I didn't, then we have to be in 2 different camps. Like we can't associate. And I don't think that's fair either. I don't think that's healthy. I think that's ridiculous.
I agree. And I think social media makes it so easy to fall into those camps because you get to see so much of what you already agree with because of algorithms and whatnot. But, it's interesting, right? Because even with something like Star Wars that's been around for so long and so beloved, it still has such a split camp on some of these things. But it's like you said, you should be able to have a conversation and disagree and then still get along. I will not share all of these tenets with you because A, I want to be respectful of your time, and B, and probably most importantly, you're an actual writer, so I don't dare share all of these tenets with you of all people. But my co-host and I, a couple of years ago, we developed something called the Homie Commandments. And basically what there are 10 storytelling elements that we think that whether it be comic books or video games or movies, TV shows, that in some way, shape, or form, all 10 of these bullet points give a solid guideline for telling a strong and tight, concise story.
The 10 Homie Commandments. I like this. No, this sounds good. Like sometimes you hear something that hits you the right way.
Thank you. And number 10, it was funny because at first, the first 9 came to us organically. Like they just flowed, boom, 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 boom. And, we got to 9 and I said, man, should we just call it here at 9? And he was like, no, we should do something else. We should at least have 10, a nice round number. And then I'm glad that we took time to think about it because it hit me. I said, well, number 10 should definitely be for the fans, which is love what you love. You don't need anyone's permission to enjoy
Absolutely something. Right.
Yeah, and along with that, there is a caveat. It is love what you love, but you have to love something despite its flaws, not ignoring those flaws. But still, love what you love.
Yeah, you know what? I was talking with my father the other day, and we came to the conclusion that there are no perfect movies. We were kind of talking about because we were talking about Star Wars, A New Hope. In fact, might have even been yesterday. Anyway, it was a very recent conversation, like super fresh. And I was like, there's some really weird things in Star Wars if you think about it. And out of love, we were just kind of talking about it. I was like, but who cares? The movie's so good. And I was like, all stories are flawed. All stories are flawed. The creator has to give up on them and finalize them at some point. So it's just, which ones don't bother you. Sometimes there's flaws that really get to you and you can't quite get past it. And other times they don't, or the story is so good that maybe the flaws kind of get, melt away a little bit and they get away with it. So everything's got flaws in it. No one's written the perfect story, and and that's fine. So like I think that's a great commandment. Love what you love, because there's going to be weird movies. There are bad movies that I like, and I know they're bad, and I'm like, why? I shouldn't like this. It's such a guilty pleasure, and I'm embarrassed to admit to my friends that I like these movies, but you do.
Yeah.
What can you do about it?
1,000%. Look, I am one of the people who I don't go around defending this movie, but I'll gladly say that, hey man, I watch it and I enjoyed it. For me, it's Batman versus Superman. That movie gets panned, and trust me, I understand why. I feel like I wouldn't be doing my job as a podcaster if I didn't understand why it got panned. But
right.
But there are just some elements about that movie
awesome.
that I really enjoy. So I think that we all have those type movies out there like that.
100%. So yeah, if your fellow co-host was on and he liked The Acolyte, I could get along with him without any problem, and you know what I'm saying, and that's how it should be,
right?
Because things hit people differently, So I think that's a great commandment, number 10.
Well, thanks. He's also a big fan of Ahsoka Tano as well, so you guys would definitely get along.
Awesome.
Yes.
Yeah, I was a huge fan. I was an early adopter of the Clone Wars. I was one of those weird guys that was like, it's on this Cartoon Network. It's really, really good Star Wars. And,
right.
and people are like, what? Clone Wars? So I was so happy that it ended up really kind of getting out there. Like, people know the Clone Wars now. Like, it isn't some totally obscure show anymore. And it makes me happy,
And thank goodness Dave Filoni has a bigger role now in the greater Star Wars landscape. I think that's ultimately a win for Star Wars.
Yes, and he's another one that some people have kind of turned on. I haven't given up on Dave Filoni. He delivered a ton of great stuff in the Clone Wars, and I thought that he kind of gets Star Wars. He added to the Star Wars lore in ways that I thought were like impactful. So I'm willing to give him, some chances here as he tries to build up, maybe a new era of Star Wars that we're working on.
Yeah, I think he's got some good things cooking. I know they have some big plans in the fire right now, so I'm just gonna keep my fingers crossed and see what we get.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not a huge fan of the Disney Star Wars era, but there are good things out there. Rogue One is Disney Star Wars, and I loved it. Yeah. There were certain episodes in Ahsoka that I really, really liked. So it's not a total failure. They have done things that Andor was really, really good. So, they have done some good things. So I try to give credit where credit is due.
Well, boy, with that being said, I can't wait to get into this conversation, and maybe we're going to circle back around and talk about Rey Skywalker. I would love to hear your thoughts about that, and maybe where tonight's topic really could have helped the writers more fully develop that character. We'll get there for sure.
Okay, yeah, no worries.
Well, with that being said, I think it's time that we properly introduce this wonderful, super intelligent, highly creative person who the homies listening are wondering, man, this guy sounds awesome, but who is he? Well, homies,
well, thank you.
Don't worry, you still got time to change their minds. This is cool.
I'm sure I'll get there somehow.
My guest here today is a writer, a creator. He's a storyteller. This man has done some tremendous things for writing fictional women in terms of their archetypes, in terms of how the heroine's journey can be different from the hero's journey, which admittedly is something that I never personally thought about until your publicist reached out to me, and I thought that this is just a fantastic concept. I would love to have him on. My guest today has also written a book, Faraway Bird, which has garnered several, not one or two, but several awards, and well deserved. I've actually been listening to it a little bit on Audible here lately, and I got to say I've thoroughly been enjoying what I've been reading so far. And
awesome!
Yeah, I thought it was. I think it's incredible so far. It was to the point where, well, for two reasons. One, because I'm a bit of a non-intellectual, and two, because I just love good storytelling. But I had no idea that Theodora, your protagonist, was an actual character. It was an actual person, like in real life.
That's not a what you call it, non-intellectual. That's not. She's very obscure. A lot of people have never heard of her. So you are in the majority by far. It's part of the reason I wrote the book is because I just, when I found her in a book, I was like, oh my God, like she's incredible. I want people to know about her. So it was always kind of a dream to write her story. I'm writing book 2 right now. But yeah, that's, you're normal on that one, you know?
And it was to the point where, like, I didn't want to spoil anything for myself, but I was like, I have to learn a little bit more. So I come to find out, so she didn't live a very long life. Spoiler alert, right? I suppose. But but you're writing a sequel. Is it just 1 or 2?
It's going to be a trilogy, actually. The first book really focused on her. One thing I hate about like reading historical fiction sometimes is the characters are so self-aware of their historical role that, you know, they speak like they know they're going to do these great things. And I always hated that because I just don't think that's how it is. So I really wanted to write a book about her just as a human being that reconciles some pretty bizarre aspects of her life. You know, she was a prostitute and she becomes an empress, and she had a hand in writing what would be women's rights by all standards today. And this is, you know, long time ago. So the first book really focuses on her long before she becomes an empress, how she got to be a person. Basically, her growth arc is from a young girl in a very exploitative society to a woman who really kind of found a form of empowerment and made a stand. So that's just a purely human story, but it meshes with all the historical details, except maybe a couple very minor ones. You know, and it reconciles things that explain who she becomes historically as well. That was the goal of that.
I gotta admit, I think that you're knocking it out of the park so far.
Thank you.
No, I mean, you just, great job. Excellent.
Man,
job.
I appreciate that.
Of course. Credit given where credit is due. So,
right on.
With that being said, my guest here today has also written another book called The Heroine's Labyrinth, which is more of a writing craft style book that can really dive deeper or show both writers and readers how to interpret and how to write maybe more nuanced, well-written female characters. I think that is, again, amazing. As you might be able to see behind me, I read a lot of comic books, and
I love it.
I mean, I'm a huge comic book junkie, and man, like, I love.
Oh, you got some great ones back there.
Oh, thank you.
Sorry,
but
my eyes, I got to kind of look it through the very bottom of my glasses. But anyway, that's good.
And, you know, I absolutely love when the female characters in these comic books are well written. But I'll go ahead and tell you this. If you think that women in television and movies were written poorly in like the 70s and the 80s and maybe the 90s and so forth, man, they've got it just as bad in a lot of comic books. But then, just like with movies or televisions, comic books also have examples of extremely well-written women. And I'm like, wow, this is great. What was this writer at when this other book was being written, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
So you've done such a great job, I think, at shedding a light on something that surprisingly hasn't been fleshed out more in 2024.
Right?
Yeah, it's crazy. So with that being said, my guest here today is none other than Douglas A. Burton. Douglas, thank you for being here, my friend.
Well, by the way, thank you for having me on. I'm honored to be here, and I enjoy talking about these things regardless. If I didn't have a book, I would still talk about these things. And even when I talk about the book, it's it's still from the place of love that started why I wrote the book. When I was writing Faraway Bird, which you were describing, I was using the hero's journey to structure it. And I studied the hero's journey for 20 years. And it's a good narrative model. They call it a monomyth, meaning like one story, because it's a story that repeats. The problem is that not every story is a hero's journey. And there is a little bit of what you could call male centrism to it. There's very, the original hero's journey as defined by Joseph Campbell was almost overtly a male arc. So if you read the original book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, it gets into this. There's a segment called Woman as Temptress. And Maureen Murdoch, who was a psychologist back in the 90s, asked Joseph Campbell at one point, what's the woman's role in the hero's journey? And he's like, don't worry about it. You don't have a role in it. The hero is on his way to you. And of course, it did not fit well with her, and it inspired her to write her own book called The Heroine's Journey, which it's a little bit different than The Hero's Journey in terms of what the book was. She really wrote a treatise on womanhood and almost like feminine spirituality in a sense in archetypal language. So it's a good book, but it's not a book that a writer could use easily. And so it was hard for me to use her book, for example. So what I wanted to do was provide something as concise and as clear as the hero's journey for writers so that they could, and by the way, let me take one step back. I didn't set out to write this book. I wrote it by default. I was writing Faraway Bird. The hero's journey fell apart for me. It didn't work. And I was kind of like, well, what is a feminine version of the hero's journey? And I found several books. And at some point I was like, I'm just going to kind of do my own study here. And I did it very loose. And I started to find some ideas that I was not finding anywhere else. And I was jotting them down and I was sharing them with other writers and then other women, my mom, my wife, my friends of mine, other creative friends of mine. And there seemed to be something there, in these discussions. And I was encouraged to write it down as a book. And I decided I would do it. I was like, cool, I'll hammer this out. And maybe I'll finish it in six months. It took me 4 years. It took me 4 years because I ended up reading all sorts of literature with female leads. I rewatched all the old movies with female leads, new movies with female leads, comic books, TV shows, and the notes just kept getting bigger and bigger. And also writing it could be sensitive. You're a man writing about, our common misconception is I'm a man writing about women. And really that's not what this book is. I'm a man, but I'm writing about female protagonists and I'm identifying patterns in stories with female protagonists. And I found 18 archetypal designs that are unique and compelling and interesting to talk about in their stories. And then I also began to find out that this is not gender exclusivist. There are plenty of male-led stories that also follow this pattern as well. So I think it is another narrative arc that just hasn't been like singled out like this before. And I'm happy. I want to share it with as many people as I can, just because it's kind of exciting. It's kind of exciting to see it and spot the patterns,
That's incredible. So in a way, you are almost writing two books at one time.
Well, when I was writing Faraway Bird, I wasn't thinking about writing the Heroine's Labyrinth. It was notes. So I had all these notes and I was like, okay, this happens in a lot of these stories. Would this pattern work in my story? And then, I just solved one of my problems. I could use this pattern here. And then it made me, so I was suddenly able to plug these patterns in. And then the story started to move in directions I never would have taken it. And like you said, it ended up winning awards. And so I credit some of that to to the fact that some of these patterns resonate with people for like primal archetypal reasons that I didn't find in a book anywhere else. I found them in these studies. So I do give some credit to that.
And that's a very important distinction that you just made there about how these weren't things that you were coming up with. You were finding these archetypes in fiction that were already written, and then you were extrapolating that information. That's a really cool approach, and it makes a lot of sense, and I dig that.
Yeah.
So
because any guy who says he is an expert on women is just you are setting yourself up, my friend. So
right.
I'm always trying to be very and some people it's easy to be misunderstood like that too. I have seen some comments on social who does this guy think he is, and I'm like I'm not making that claim. Mm-hmm. It's simply patterns found in hero-led fiction, and like you just said, those patterns exist kind of psychologically and are repeating themselves psychologically. And so I think there's a reason for that. And it can be very fun and exciting to explore why these patterns appear.
So obviously, I don't need you to give away too much information here. You guys just need to go out and get the book. But with Heroine's Labyrinth, what are some differences you've noticed between like a heroine's journey versus a hero's traditional journey?
So the fundamental distinction is the nature of the journey itself. So the classic hero's journey is about a hero, usually a male protagonist, who departs from the native culture, goes through a series of trials, sharpens his skills, and becomes very competent at great loss. It's not a fun journey. This isn't a cakewalk. Masters some skills, and then confronts a militant outsider character, either through monster combat or a straight up villain, and then hopefully defeats that villain, which it's an archetypal type of villain called the distant dragon. And the hero sets out and slays that dragon and then returns to the native culture. In fact, Act 1 for Joseph Campbell's hero's journey is called Departure. And then Act 3 is called The Return. So that is a fundamental aspect of the hero's journey. It's a departure and a return and he's a changed man. He goes from an inexperienced novice to someone who's capable of slaying a dragon. And there's a growth arc there. It's a meaningful growth arc, and a lot of people can identify with it, including myself. There is a whiff of, warrior hunter ethos to it, a warrior hunter code. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't think it's outdated. I think you can learn a lot from the warrior ethos. I've read Bruce Lee's books, and there's some brilliant wisdom in his books. And it's not because he goes out and picks fights. It's not like this guy's encouraging you to go pick fights with everybody.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like, there's real wisdom into the nature of confrontation and how you handle force. So there's a lot of that in the hero's journey. And so I'm not sour on the hero's journey. I can see how it can be misused. And I can see that there is absolutely valid criticism for it, but there is some good stuff in it as well. I'll say that the Heroine's Labyrinth is distinctive because in a lot of heroine-centric stories, it doesn't have this departure and return. It tends to be a journey that stays within the native culture. In fact, it delves deeper into the native culture, and she discovers a lot of problems within the native culture. And so the primary conflict is between the heroine and her native culture. The rules, social norms, gender roles, traditions, and certain heritage that this is the way we've always done it. Totally common in heroine-centric stories. So without a departure and a return, I began to question whether the hero's journey could work there. And so what you really have is a immersion into the native culture instead of a departure. I call it immersion or enculturation process early in the story. And then by the end, you get what I call a permutation or a rearrangement of the native culture in some way, big or small. She changes something about something fixed within the native culture. On a small scale, it could be she finds self-empowerment in her own household. It could be that simple, or on a large scale, it could be the complete overturning of the social order, like in the Hunger Games. Right. Complete revolution. That's the most extreme version of social change there is. But social change can also be a very private, very small affair that's equally important as she learns to overcome a challenge in her native culture. So I think that alone is fundamentally and existentially different in terms of the nature of the conflict and what the person is going through compared to what the hero experiences when he sets out on a hero's journey.
Wow. Yeah, that was excellently put. And I'll tell you, several different stories came to mind throughout. Like, when you described the hero's journey, myself and probably a lot of other listeners thought of Tolkien's work.
Absolutely.
I mean, that sounds like Tolkien all day long. When you when you gave me that example of like the heroine's journey, I thought about, I don't know if you've seen it, the movie Prey. It's like,
yes, I have.
Okay,
Naru.
Yeah. Yes. I thought of her almost immediately. Like, wow. So she has the struggle of really not fully being accepted as a warrior amongst her people.
Yes,
though that's what she wants, and admittedly at first she really isn't. So it's not like she starts off, this, be a badass, but along the way she has the inner growth and development, and then she's able to not only overcome the actual physical threat, but also like the kind of the things blocking her from within. And
right.
Yeah, so I think that was kind of a really cool example, the first one that came to my mind.
Yeah, Prey is a good example of that because, like you said, obviously the Predator is a challenger, and the Predator is a hero's journey style type of villain. Mm-hmm. He's a militant outsider. It's more monster combat. However, a lot of Naru's problems still come from the nature of her role in the tribe and what she's supposed to be doing, what the cultural expectations for who she's supposed to be versus who she wants to be. And I want to point out that there are several heroine-centric stories in which the hero in Sacred Fire is a warrior ethos. And that's awesome. That's awesome. It's what she cares about. It's what burns bright in her, and she wants to pursue that. And in those stories, the native culture is telling her no. You're not cut out for this. Let the guys handle this. We have different expectations. We have a different plan for you. And she has to go up against this. And that happens to Naru. So she ends up having a little bit of a hybrid situation where she's up against social norms, right? And then there's this militant outsider. The difference is it invades her home territory. Right. And that is part of a heroine's labyrinth archetypal design. In Act 3, it's called Home is Battleground. A lot of heroines end up fighting. Their climax takes place either in their home or on home turf or in a residential situation. Even heroines with the warrior ethos, like Beatrix Kiddo in Kill Bill. Oh, yeah. She's a badass, man. She goes on what feels like a hero's journey in some case. Where's the center of the labyrinth? At the end of movie 2, she ends up in a house. Yeah. It's a residential home. So this is common for heroines to end up in this sort of a situation where the home itself is compromised. Home is supposed to be a safe place, and heroines are facing compromised households or compromised areas on home turf in a lot of their stories. And I think that's a big deal.
Yeah, I want to pause for a second and just point out the fact that you knew the bride's real name.
Oh, yeah, Beatrix Kiddo.
I consider myself a pretty big movie buff. I don't think, gun to my head, I would have been able to recall that one. That was impressive.
Well, to be perfectly fair, I called her the bride forever. Only when I had to write the story did I have to start. In fact, I think in the first draft, I started with her as the bride. Uh-huh. And then when I looked at her, I was like, oh, Beatrix Kiddo. So that was acquired.
Gotcha. So what I want to do now is I would love to walk back to your childhood here for a second. And I want to know, what were some of your earlier influences in storytelling that eventually got you to being bit by the writing bug? Like what movies or television shows or maybe even video games or anything that you experienced that made you say, wow, I love storytelling and maybe I want to try this one day?
Well, there's some obvious ones in there and then maybe some less obvious ones. So I'll get the obvious ones out of the way. Star Wars was massive for me. It was technically the first movie I ever saw. I was like 18 months old and my dad brought me into that. So I don't have any memory of this. I do have memory of seeing Empire Strikes Back, though. So Star Wars was a big deal because it had such a cultural impact. And of course, I bought all the Star Wars figures and everything. And, it just fosters the imagination when you play with the Star Wars figures. Star Trek was another big one for me. I watched mostly the movies, though. I was mostly the 80s Star Trek movies guy. Then as I got older, the Terminator, Aliens was a big one for me as well. The first movie that scared the bejesus out of me was Aliens. I was probably 10 or 11, and I was
Aliens.
So I saw the sequel first.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay, it came out in 1986. I was 10, and I remember begging my dad to see it. And at the time, my parents were splitting up, so they were like willing to bend some rules to like win you over, and that worked to my favor, or so I thought. He's like, "Oh, you want to see Aliens? You got it. We're going to see Aliens." So he put this movie in, and it blew my hair back. I was so scared. It freaked me out. Those things like coming at these were combat troops, man. Like you felt safe with these guys, and they were just wiped out, and it freaked me out, man. So I was like, whoa. I was pretty upset. I would draw pictures of the aliens and everything. So those were the big 80s movies that I think hit a lot of people the right way, and it hit me that way. But then there were some other movies that really captured my imagination. Superman is another one, 1978. That was probably one of my favorite ones as a boy. But the movie Amadeus, which is about two rival composers. It came out in 1984. There was something about that movie that just mesmerized me about the storytelling. And so I remember with a VHS tape that we taped off cable, putting it in there and taking notes on this movie as a kid, trying to figure out where the magic of this movie came from. Like, how is this movie put together? I'd hit pause and scribble my notes and hit play. And write. So that was a big one for me as well. And then, of course, you got the 90s. You have Terminator 2. That was huge. Jurassic Park came out, kind of captured the imagination with the spectacle of dinosaurs. Then The Matrix in 1999. So I definitely came from a background where a lot of the boy movies, I liked those movies. But when you stop and think about it, Aliens, Alien, Terminator 2, these are hero-centric stories.
Yes.
And so in the modern age, there's a lot of flack toward like guys not liking female heroines. And I always took that personal because I'm like, that's not true. Like I definitely like heroines. And of course there are some people that don't like heroines just for blanket reasons. So I'm not discounting that, but sometimes when you read articles in the media, you feel like you're lumped into it. And I'm like, oh man, well, that's not true. Like there are a lot of, awesome heroines. So at the time that I was doing the Heroine's Labyrinth, that was a topic, about. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to pour all my appreciation for great heroines, both past and present, into this story. I even included Barbie in the analysis. One of the last films I was able to include in the analysis. I liked Barbie. I did not mind it. I didn't like, it's not like my favorite movie of all time or anything like that, but it's a good movie. I laughed at it. I didn't mind it. And, my thing was, there might be a cringe line here or there maybe, but, I felt like they're teasing you. They're teasing us guys. Every girl that's ever liked me teases me the exact same way. She makes fun of me for the things that I do. So, I could laugh at myself.
Yeah.
So anyway, those are some of the childhood movies that I carried with me, but there is an appreciation of heroic women in fiction that I think gets overlooked in this kind of culture war sometimes. And I just wanted to be clear-headed about it. there are great heroic women in fiction, and I think they deserve just as much attention as Luke Skywalker and Neo, and my favorite male characters.
I absolutely agree with that, and it makes me think about. I think it was an interview with Jennifer Lawrence. I don't know if you remember this, and I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt and say that she misspoke.
Okay.
She misspoke. She didn't really mean what she said, but she said
I
something.
think I know which one. Yeah.
She said something along the lines of her as Katniss in the Hunger Games was really the first female-centric heroic role in Hollywood, and there I am sitting down as a longtime Alien fan.
Totally.
Thinking, Ellen Ripley predates you by decades,
Yes.
And I'm thinking, Sarah Connor predates you by decades. And Lucy Lawless as Xena predates you by...
Xena, yep.
And I'm like, there are... And so like you said, there are examples of actually really well-written female protagonists, but for whatever reason... Maybe it's just so other people can get a point across, but for some reason they're either not mentioned or seem to be lost to time. But I'm like, these are classic characters in amazing movies.
Right. So to be honest, I had to laugh at her comment. I made fun of her for it. I'm not going to lie. I was like, what are you talking about? But to be fair, to be professional, okay. I think you said the right thing. You're like, I'm going to give her a pass, or I'll give her the benefit of the doubt. And there is a part of me that has to be fair to her on some level too. Here's what I think, and I'm not trying to make excuses for her. Okay. This is just my own reasoning on this. She was probably told in her life that you can't do this. Female characters don't sell as many tickets. So I guarantee there was some discussion on that level that bothered her, where they said that you got to put a male in it or else you won't sell tickets. And there's probably some statistics to back that up. Hollywood studio would not say that if it weren't true on some level. Now, but culture changes. So at some point that may not be true anymore. And I think we're there. And I think the box office has rewarded great heroic women in fiction on the big screen. To your point, though, too, we've rewarded great heroic women on the big screen before. I think from a Hollywood studio point, it was not consistent enough for them to bank on it as a rule. And I think that's what she was probably talking about. She's probably remembering conversations where she was told that women don't sell the tickets that men do, and that probably irked her.
Right.
And then she said it in the worst possible way that everyone can fact check her on in about 3 seconds of summoning memories of. So, that's my way of trying to reconcile that silly comment with what probably she meant.
Again, with benefit of the doubt, I think that is probably what she was going for. But that is actually a really good reason what you give, because she probably had been told that. And I can definitely see that, as unfortunate and as untrue as it is. That also reminds me of a statement made by a former Marvel executive who was no longer there. And again, his words may have been misconstrued or taken out of context. I don't know. I wasn't there.
Right.
So, I won't try to slander this man too much, but, he said something along the lines of he wasn't for a Captain Marvel movie or a Black Panther movie because he didn't think that a woman lead or a black lead would particularly sell in that kind of environment in the superhero space. And I mean, obviously he was wrong. Both those movies made billions. But it is interesting to think that maybe there are still some archaic thoughts that have been holding Hollywood back. Do you think that Hollywood is maybe 10 years behind the bell curve in terms of development and using or utilizing certain characters properly?
My take is that, so first off, to get to one of your, I want to back up. Black Panther is one of the highest grossing superhero films ever made.
Yes.
If you go into the box office numbers and look at them, Black Panther is right up there. If not, I should probably relook at these numbers, but Black Panther is not just a good one that made some money. It's one of the best all time.
Yes.
It's incredible. So, and I don't want to distract.
Oh, you've gone.
It might be I'm talking like top 3, top 2 highest grossing superhero films of all time. So, and of course, it's going to be tough to beat like Endgame, which has all the star power of all the heroes, including Black Panther in it. So, yeah, they were, if they used that wisdom on the movie, The Black Panther, they would have failed so miserably and left billions of dollars on the table. So, and Black Panther sold merchandise.
Yes.
My son dressed up as Black Panther, my oldest son at the time. So, he was a popular character. And I think also Chadwick Boseman was the perfect actor for that role. Right. And it's a shame we have lost him so early. I'm a little upset at Marvel for not recasting him.
Same. I agree.
They should have recast him because we have recast other iconic roles in the past. And I think Black Panther as a character, too culturally vital to skip over at that point. And I think Wakanda Forever did not pull the kind of numbers. I think had they said we need a new king of Wakanda and they recast the role, all of us would have gone along with that. I would have been happy as hell to go along with. His presence was sorely missing in that sequel. And so anyway, I just wanted to mention that about Black Panther, that's when you talk about the conventional wisdom of we shouldn't have a female lead, and Captain Marvel, I think broke $1 billion as well. I do think Captain Marvel had a little bit of a boost. I'm not trying to knock it, but it came out at a really ideal time. What's that?
No,
what'd you say?
No, I said, no, I don't mind. I knock that movie all the time, but I can't knock the facts. The facts are the movie made $1 billion.
It made $1 billion. It did come out at an ideal time. Like you look at Iron Man 3, which is equally wobbly as a movie, but it came out at the right time and that movie took off. So either way, the point is, like you just said, the facts are these movies made billions of dollars. So the conventional wisdom is not always right. And I think culture changes. And I think, what the audience wants or doesn't even know it wants sometimes, a studio can deliver that for you. I think my personal take on Hollywood is that they're trying so hard in some ways to promote women or let's say a black lead that they're bungling it. Sometimes it feels like they draw so much attention to it that it's like, do you want the actor or the lead to get credit or do you want credit for this? Because you're spending an awful lot of time in the media patting yourself on the back for this great, the first, whatever. So sometimes I think they can't get out of their own way. I think if they would just shut up and deliver the goods, I think we'd be fine with it. People will be fine with it. Well-written characters, great stories are embraced by everybody. I don't have to see myself on screen to like a character.
Agreed.
And I'm pretty sure the same is true with you or anybody else. But the other argument, which I think is fair, is it's nice to have some diversity in this. And I don't mean that in the political word. I mean it in the natural sense. Diversity as in, what are some other types of heroes? What else do we got? What else can we do here? Even as a writer, diversity is a good thing to include because it brings a new dimension into your story. So I think diversity is good. I think it gets tagged unfairly sometimes as woke. And sometimes that's not even true. It's just diverse. And, so I think if you have and the reason I'm bringing that up is I want to kind of drive a wedge between, woke, bad woke, and good diversity because they are two different things. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. And I'm glad that you bring that up because there are a lot of people who just kind of combine the two into one giant pot. And I'm like, well, that's not helpful in anything. And two, if anything, is actually regressing any kind of progress that was being made in Hollywood, So, like, for example, you mentioned Black Panther 2, Wakanda Forever. And I remember with that movie, on one hand, I was really excited to see Shuri kind of get a move up. But because I love the character of Shuri. I think that's an incredible character. But I also think that the movie hindered itself by not only by not recasting T'Challa, because like you said, that character is so important.
Yes.
But to that, they also kept reminding you as the audience that there is no more T'Challa. Every time,
Yeah.
every opportunity they got, they reminded you, by the way, he's gone. And I'm like, man, this isn't helping. And I felt that to a degree, I almost felt like they were trying to blur the lines between where does our mourning for Chadwick end and our mourning for T'Challa begin. Like, they really tried to blur the lines there. And as a viewer, I didn't really appreciate that too much either. But, I mean, ultimately, it's like, if you just try to put your primary focus on telling a good story, what's going to be best for the story? I think that there is where you will find your success 9 times out of 10. And that doesn't mean that Shuri can't be Black Panther. I have Black Panther comics on my shelf. There are times where both her and T'Challa were Black Panther simultaneously. That is absolutely an avenue that they could have explored. Where we still get Shuri.
She was...
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
I was going to say, where we still get Shuri in that kind of lead role, but T'Challa is also operating as well. I don't see why we couldn't have gone that angle, but that's just one example of many.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Sure, like you said, now the actor does play a huge role in carrying a film. And I do, like, when I think about Chadwick versus I forgot, what is her name? It starts with V, right?
I think, I thought it was an L.
Letitia.
Man. Oh my goodness, I'm drawing a blank. That's going to bother me.
I know. Letitia Wright.
Letitia Wright, there we go.
That's right. So, Chadwick, I think, had that it factor to absolutely carry the role. And he did, and he delivered. And I think that is inarguable. Right. I don't know anyone who I don't even think I've heard someone make the argument that this guy, fell short in his delivery of the Black Panther. I mean, he nailed that role. And over the summer, my kids and I watched all the Marvel movies in order again up to Endgame. And, it was remarkable. In as early as Civil War, I think, was his introduction. Right there, I was like, man, the Black Panther, he is there now. Like, he is, there was no warming up to the role. So can Letitia Wright carry that kind of gravity? I don't know. I'll just say I don't think so.
Yeah.
But to your point, does that mean she couldn't be cast there? No, absolutely. She could try to fulfill that role. That is certainly one solution to the problem. If the Black Panther dies, who's going to take his place? It could be her. But I do think that there is something to say about the level of gravitas an actor can bring. And I'll just say, I don't care who you are, replacing Chadwick Boseman is going to be a task. Yeah. And I'm not. That's what I'm trying to say. I'm not trying to put Letitia Wright down. Right. I don't care who you put there. You're asking a lot of that actor or actress. So you had that going against you.
And I just want to point this out. Marvel, if you're listening, I'm up to the challenge.
Yeah, let's do it. We've got part 3 ready to go.
Oh, I can see that box office bomb now. It would be incredible. So what have been some of your favorite female protagonists, ones that you think really embody the components of A Heroine's Labyrinth? And then on the flip side, I want to know, are there any female characters that you've seen in fiction that you wish had maybe embodied more of those characteristics?
Yeah, and I think that'll lead a segue to something you mentioned earlier. Some of my favorites are Ellen Ripley is my all-time favorite heroine, hands down. Like, and a lot of it has to do with how long I've liked her movies. She gets the advantage of being there in 1986, and then actually all the way back to 1979 in Alien. Sarah Connor, another one of my all-time favorites. I actually like. Have you ever seen Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon?
Yes.
I actually really like Jen Yu. She's kind of a villain / heroine in that movie. She kind of redeemed herself. I really like her character as well. She's really cool. I like Beatrix Kiddo from Kill Bill. Katniss Everdeen is hard to overlook. You know, the first action heroine.
Were you a fan of Jamie Lee Curtis and the Halloween franchise?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
Laurie Strode. Yeah,
Yes.
In fact, I'll probably watch Halloween tonight. My wife gave me the old nudge and it's like, "Want to watch Halloween?" I'm like, "Yes."
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I might actually watch that one. I like Coraline.
Yeah.
I think she's a fun heroine. Who are some other ones? Man, there's a lot.
I know.
It's so funny. My mind is so encyclopedic. Sometimes it's hard to zero in on just one thing.
Yeah, my mind.
Princess Leia.
Oh, yeah,
obviously.
Of course, yeah.
Princess Leia. Who else? Oh, believe it or not, I like Rapunzel from Tangled. I like
nice.
her. Oh, I like Moana. Moana is awesome.
Yes.
The movie Moana actually just is the gift that keeps on giving. You can keep watching; it never gets old. So I think they hit a modern Disney classic with that one, even though they'd struggled on some of their more recent stuff.
Right.
Moana was fantastic. So anyway, that's a decent list. Those are some of my favorites, and you know, in about 3 minutes, I'll probably 15 more will pop into my head. you know what I'm saying?
Another one of my favorites, because a lot of the ones you mentioned I also have on my list as well. But another one for me was the I think it was 1998 Mulan. I absolutely love that movie, and I love that character, and I love the story they tell with that character. I don't know what happened with the remake, the live action remake, but man, that original one really had something to say that resonated with me as like a little black kid, you know, a little black boy.
Oh, so, really? That's awesome.
Well, yeah, because the whole idea behind the original Mulan was the fact that, you know, it doesn't matter who you are or what people try to relegate you to. If you work at it, you can do it. And I mean, as simple of a message as that may seem, I think that's extremely important. I know a lot of adults who really need to hear that message. And I hated that children today couldn't get that with the live action version, which to me basically stated you got to be born with superpowers and then you can do great things.
Yes. Agreed. Yes, that was the flaw. Mm-hmm. Chi. They called it Chi in that movie. And you're right. So that's funny you said that, because one of my arguments against some of the modern heroines, the ones that I think aren't working, I think about what would a little girl be, you know, so for example, you just mentioned in Mulan, if a girl in the real world, a young girl, is having self-doubt, which is going to happen, you know, that is going to happen. She's going to have self-doubt. She's going to question whether she should continue on. You know, she's going to have a crisis of confidence. If the answer in the movie is draw upon your magical chi, it's not going to help her. It's not going to help her that much unless there's another thing there as well. Because, you know, like Luke is using the Force, but he had to lose battles. You have to complement it with real world wisdom as well. And I think they missed that opportunity. So that's a great point. And you're right. The animated Mulan didn't have that problem. You could watch it. I could watch it and feel like, man, I just watched the character overcome something and that meant something, you know? So that's a great point, what you just said.
So with that being said, what are some that maybe could have used a little bit more refinement in your
Mulan? That's a good one, because I wanted to like the live action Mulan. I really did. It was while I was writing the Heroine's Labyrinth, and I was like, oh, cool, here's another one, a movie I could study. And I can't tell you how unfortunate it is if there's a modern movie with a heroine that I don't even want to include in the book, because it's like, what a waste. You know, that's why I was happy. Barbie was a cultural moment. Even if you didn't like the film, you have to acknowledge it was a cultural touchstone. It made $1 billion. It was I think the number one movie of 2023. So, you know, it
beat Oppenheimer.
Reach audiences. It wasn't an accident. What's that?
I said it beat Oppenheimer. You know,
it beat Oppenheimer. Chris Nolan. So So I was happy that Barbie was at least, it was culturally relevant. Mm-hmm. And so there was something there for me, not just to study, but also to share with other people in a movie that they probably saw. So that's important. Probably the number one heroine, and I know this is a dead horse, Rey from Star Wars, I felt was an extreme disappointment. And I think there are several reasons why she didn't work. And believe it or not, the heroine's Labyrinth, and I'm not even just trying to tie this in, this is relevant to this particular conversation. When I tried to map her story onto the heroine's Labyrinth, it doesn't fit because she's missing all the archetypes. And likewise, she's missing most of the archetypes or archetypal events or moments from the hero's journey as well. So to me, that suggests that one of the reasons she may have failed as a heroine, and I'm going to say this, she wasn't a total failure. I think we can all dial it back to 2015 to The Force Awakens. She did generate real excitement at first. So, she came out of the gate strong and then kind of sputtered out kind of fast. But to be fair, my wife dressed up as her. I was Kylo Ren. Mm-hmm. My wife was Rey, and I'm trying to think what the kids were. I think they were Angry Birds that year. Nice. I can't remember, but anyway, she had the moments there, but she didn't follow through, and I think it has to do with her arc. I don't think she actually had much of an arc, and I think that fundamental aspects of a character and a character arc were missing for her. And I can point to the heroine's Labyrinth and identify fundamental, critical archetypal moments that were skipped for her that I think would have done her a lot of good. In fact, the main one that I like to point out with her in particular is an archetypal design that I call the Sacred Fire. And the Sacred Fire in heroines is a very powerful archetype. It can work with male heroes too. Mm-hmm. It's slightly different, but it's fundamentally similar. The Sacred Fire is something that is expressed in multiple ways in a heroine-centric story. Think of it as a fire that burns bright inside the heroine. As guys, we understand this. This is not foreign to us. An aspiration that you have, something that you really want to do. Like you said, when you talk about movies, that's part of your sacred fire. There's something there that keeps burning bright for you, and it won't whether you got paid or whether you didn't get paid. You're going to do it. And heroines and heroine-centric stories let us know about this. Disney films are great for this. They have the opening number, which is the heroine claiming her sacred fire. I have dreams to do something, and I don't have it now, but I'll get there someday. I don't know how, but I'll fulfill this dream. That's a sacred fire moment. The key, though, is that the sacred fire comes from something. And the way I try to describe it is, imagine a bonfire, and you grab one log out of that bonfire, and it's a torch. The individual is that torch, but it came from the communal bonfire of your culture.
Gotcha.
Which is it, right? You came from your parents. You came from somewhere. Right. So there's something of continuity that exists inside you that is important. It's where you get your culture. It's where you get your values. And this is usually passed to you directly from either your parent or your guardian, whoever raised you. And so there is some expectation of continuity in the sacred fire. And this presents a conflict for heroines a lot. Heroine says, I want to go this way. And the native culture says, we think you're going to go this way. Mm-hmm. And in the old British literature, like Jane Eyre or Pride and Prejudice, it was always marriage. Right. You're going to get married. You're going to have kids. This is what the culture needs of you. We don't need you to do anything else. and the heroine's like, no, right. I have these other aspirations. And that's a classic conflict between the continuity expectations of the native culture and the individual aspirations of the heroine, right?
Yeah. So
and then there's usually a third dimension, which is the villain character, which we'll get into, called the Masked Minotaur, who is fundamentally different than the Distant Dragon. The Masked Minotaur is a homegrown character who comes from the native culture, And the masked minotaur usually attempts to possess the sacred fire of the heroine, like madness, like pathological madness. They have to possess the heroine because they're attracted to the sacred fire of the heroine.
Gotcha.
So, right. So one of the problems. So that's what I call the classic heroine conflict triangle: the individual aspiration, which is based on individuation, agency, free will. That's the heroine's sacred fire. And then the native culture makes a claim on her sacred fire in the interest of continuity. They want her to continue something. The most primal thing that societies want women to continue is life, to pass on the family name. And that's the primal thing. In more elevated, more modern stories, it could be the culture of the FBI, like in Clarice Starling, Silence of the Lambs, right. Another one of my favorites.
Yes.
But there's something in continuity that must be passed on. The Black Panther, which is, by the way, a heroine's Labyrinth story model. I had a great discussion with a YouTuber about this. There's the idea of Wakandan culture there's a continuity facet to, he's not just Black Panther. He's not just some vigilante. He is also the king of Wakanda.
Right.
And there's a cultural expectation placed on him. So he must honor this continuity while still honoring his own individuation at the same time. That's a conflict. So Rey, to get back to Rey, had a total power outage on the continuity factor in her. There's almost nothing passed down to her. We never even get a last name for her, which is bizarre. That's bizarre because a last name tells you something about where you came from on some level, somehow. And Disney had a problem with this. Solo. Han didn't even have a last name in that movie. Really weird that they're skipping the step, this idea that almost like you're born into a vacuum. This is going to be very hard to connect to audiences if you skip this step, because we all come from somewhere.
Right.
And if you skip that step, that's a big problem. So the reason Force Awakens got away with it is because they suggested that she did come from somewhere, and we'll find out soon. And then The Last Jedi came by and said, you came from drunks, from nobody, which is the worst version of the sacred fire you can get. It's not that it can never work, but it's certainly not inspiring.
Right.
And then in part 3, they changed it and said, no, your sacred fire, you actually come from the Emperor, which is meaningless at that point because there's no relationship factor into that. So Rey had no sacred fire. She came from nothing. She didn't carry her past with her. If you watch A New Hope, the presence of Luke's father my father was a navigator on a spice frame. He cares about who his dad was.
Right.
When Obi-Wan Kenobi tells him in the first movie, your father was murdered by this guy named Vader, now Luke has a bone to pick with whoever this guy Vader was. And of course, this narrative shifts to Vader is his father, but spoiler alert. But the sacred fire is very important from an archetypal standpoint because all life comes from something at a primal level. We all come from something, and there's something we're going to not only take from the past and bring with us, but we're going to pass something of that past on. And hopefully we add something of ourselves to that from this day and age. Maybe we fixed something, or we perfected something, or, well, not perfected, but maybe we improved upon something, and we get to pass that on to the next generation or to the next group of professionals coming into the job space or to friends, to something. So the continuity factor of the sacred fire was completely missing from Rey. And I think that was an early misstep that never got reconciled in that story as a result.
And to your point about Rey lacking the sacred fire, I think a large part of that comes from you have to have something to pass down. And with Rey, she was a blank slate from almost from beginning to end. And she was what I call a reactionary character. And that is a character who only acts when acted upon, who don't really tend to have their own motives, or like if left alone, what would this character do? Looking at Rey, I don't know, because she only ever acts when she's acted upon, and
Yeah.
and you know, like that. And for me, that's kind of a red flag, because I need to know what do you do if you know, you're just sitting down, you know, reading the newspaper. Like what are your thoughts? What do you do when you're at home on a day off? You know, it's like watching a TV show that has a bottle episode where like the main characters don't really do anything, but still so much happens because those characters have personality traits, those characters have feelings, those characters have motives. And so those bottle episodes become so interesting because it's all about those characters. But if there is no real character depth there, then you can't explore any of that. And I think that was kind of the problem with Rey.
Great point. You know what you just made me think is, which totally makes your point. She was on Jakku, and the Millennium Falcon was on Jakku that whole time. Mm-hmm. You know, and nothing ever happened. Like she reacted to events, and now she's flying off. So yeah, like all the elements were there the whole time, and you know, she didn't have any personal motivation to do much anyway. That's a great point. A reactionary character. That's a great phrase.
Oh, thank you.
I will credit you if I ever use that. I promise.
Oh, by all means, yeah. But you know, so yeah, looking back at Rey, I know they are going to do another movie with her, and you know, at first I was really down on that idea. Like, come on, Disney, aren't you guys hemorrhaging enough money right now? But you know, the more I think about it, they're gonna do this movie whether I want them to or not. My co-host and I are gonna watch it and review it whether we want to or not. And
that'll all happen.
Yeah. But the one silver lining is they can use this as an opportunity to really help that character develop. And maybe if the writing is good enough, sometimes writing in movies or TV shows is so good that it can retroactively make the previous work seem a little bit better. And you know,
100%.
Yeah, I'm hoping for that.
Well, let's be honest, the prequels had some flaws, right? The prequels were, I was not happy when the prequels came out. I was like, what kind of dialogue is this? It was like nails on a chalkboard. Like, I was like, oh my God. The Clone Wars animated series retroactively repaired some of it, because what happened was the real conflict of the prequels was the Clone Wars. And Lucas kind of did a big setup with the Phantom Menace, and then a little bit more setup with Attack of the Clones, and then skipped over that conflict and went into Revenge of the Sith, which I actually like Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah.
But once I watched all the Clone Wars episodes and I really understood that conflict, how it's really big set piece battles where, the original trilogy is, a group of revolutionaries that go up against the Empire. So we get what appear to be set piece battles, but it's really a small pocket of irregular military fighting a big military force. The Clone Wars is like World War II. It's like major power, and these two are clashing, and great fight scenes, and I really got into it. And I think the prequels have aged well because of it, because that story is actually good. The movies were heavily flawed. So I keep hearing, this is probably what you're referring to, at least indirectly, if not directly. I see YouTube videos sometimes like this franchise is dead. No franchise is dead in that you're always one great story away from bringing it all back. Yeah. So you can make 15 bad movies and a franchise is kind of like laying there doing nothing, not bringing in new fans, or driving off fans. You tell one great story in that universe again with a great character again, we will all come back, unless you're just blockheaded or stubborn, we'll come back. Like I know I will. So I'm not going to fight it if it's good.
Yeah. One question that, my co-host and I often have to answer on this podcast, and it comes up like every 6 months, like clockwork. It's the superhero genre dead. And, it happens all the time. We first heard that after Endgame. So where did they go now? Is it dead? And then we got it during like the pandemic years. when we were getting not so great movies from Marvel? Is it dead? Because I love both Marvel and DC, but in terms of movies, the MCU is really leading the race in terms of superhero movies. So if they're succeeding, then the genre is succeeding. But if they're not succeeding, then maybe the genre is in trouble. And ultimately, like our answer was kind of the same as what you just said. Like, you're always going to be one great hit away from going on tour again. And so people thought that, okay, so after Endgame, that's it. Like, that's the exclamation point. That's the end of the sentence. And we kind of floundered for a while, with other movies that didn't really seem to lead or go anywhere. But then you get a Spider-Man No Way Home, and it makes almost $2 billion worldwide.
Big numbers for that movie.
Huge numbers.
And it's a fun one. It's a fun movie.
Yeah, it's so much fun. I really had a blast with that movie. And most importantly with No Way Home, it wasn't just a nostalgia trip. Tom Holland's Peter Parker, he does some extreme growing throughout the course of that movie. And
he faces his dark side, and he was kind of your squeaky clean teenager before, and then suddenly he's got these murderous thoughts. You're totally right.
Yeah. And we go on, and then we get a few more deaths, and people go, "Oh, it's dead," and then we get the announcement of 2 more Avengers movies coming out, and they're like, "We're back," and And so, like, it really is, like, it's a roller coaster. No roller coaster goes up forever, and if it did, it would be a dull roller coaster.
Well, and to be honest, the MCU from Iron Man to Endgame, there's nothing else like it. I mean, they were just pumping out hit after hit after hit, and I think I mentioned that my kids and I watched it over the summer. We started with Iron Man, which totally holds up. I can't believe how good Iron Man was. Yeah. You could still see a little bit of like the Bush era, war in Iraq. There's still some. That's the only thing that really dated it, but there, it still felt like it felt like a great movie. It was so fun. Yes. He was good. The villain was good, and we watched it all the way to Endgame. And for the most part, even the movies that I didn't like so much, I liked them a lot more the second. Like, I liked Iron Man 3 more than I remembered. I liked Iron Man 2 more than I remembered. I liked Ant-Man and the Wasp more than I remembered. I even liked Captain Marvel more than I remembered. I know some people are going to hate me for saying that, but seeing 90 Samuel L. Jackson, come on, that's worth something, man. So you know what I'm saying? Like, there was some decent stuff in there.
Yeah.
So it's hard to keep doing that. Give me a second.
Oh, of course.
Sorry, I got like a tickle in my throat, but it is hard to keep making these hits. I think the problem after Endgame was that Endgame really did the impossible. It's a flawed movie, but I think it mostly delivered. I think it delivered a satisfying end for all of us. The end battle with all the star power, like it's incredible. Everyone had their moment in the battle. Yeah. I have to say, as flawed as, like, when I can pick out flaws in it, but I love Endgame. I thought they stuck an impossible landing. The problem is they tried to Endgame-ize all the subsequent, like, standalone movies, and what they needed to do was go back to small storytelling.
Yes.
Tony Stark in a cave making an iron suit, something simple and heroic. And, go back to the basics and tell the small stories, because the only reason Endgame worked is because you did the work with the small stories and to get us there. And then they tried to get us there every time in one movie. And it's like, I'm not there at all.
Yeah, it doesn't work like that, Absolutely. Yeah. So, Douglas, I don't want to keep you too much longer, so I just have a few more questions for you.
Sure.
I want to be respectful of your time. So, let me ask you this. Let's say, and this may have already happened, so you can just give me like a wink and a nod if this has already happened to you. But let's say that you're brought into some big Hollywood executive's office, and they sit you down, and they say, Douglas, we've read A Heroine's Labyrinth, and there's a lot of really good and useful information that we can glean from this. But we want to know from you, what are the 3 main things that we as Hollywood filmmakers should try to use from your book?
I would say the 3 fundamental aspects of the heroine's conflict triangle will get you really far. One, understand the native culture, which is the labyrinth itself. Understand the native culture that the heroine, and it could be a male character, by the way. If it's going to be a labyrinth narrative arc, you need to understand the culture that the hero or heroine is in. You have to understand that, because you have to understand what's driving conflict. What are they not supposed to do? Where is the peer pressure coming from? What are they told from peers that they're not good at? Where does the self-doubt come from? What does the culture shut you off from? Where are the dead ends of this labyrinth? If you understand that, and it's weird. As a human being, it's addictive when you start hearing what the rules are. When I watch a movie and it's a sci-fi and they're like, or don't feed him after midnight. Whenever a character starts telling you rules, it's like our brains activate, like, oh, I'm receiving survival instructions. I must. So when you lay out rules, the people in the audience or reading the book are very attentive to a character delivering rules. Don't ever do this. Don't ever go over there. Don't ever talk to those people. Don't ever do that. Whatever these rules are that are being fed to the character, that is where you're going to drive conflict. So that is the native culture's claim on the hero. So that claim, the native culture's presence in the protagonist's life, is going to create conflict. 2, understand the villain. The villain is not just an antagonist. They're not just there antagonizing, pulling the hair of the heroine. They are someone who exists in the native culture, who has mastered in some way the rules of the native culture and are very, very successful. They're very typically social apex characters. They wield social power, and they are trying to possess the heroine or the hero for their own purposes. Black Panther, Eric Killmonger, he is trying to grab the crown of Wakanda, which is the sacred fire of T'Challa. So, you have a character that's trying to possess you. You have to understand where this antagonist is coming from. And then 3, you have to understand your heroine and her sacred fire. What does she want? The culture will block her for it. The Masked Minotaur will try to possess her while she tries to push forward with this. And if you understand those 3 things, you have conflict. And if you have conflict, you have a story. So I think if you can identify your heroine's sacred fire, both in terms of her personal aspirations and how that creates conflict with her native culture, you have a character. If you understand the native culture, you have a setting and a conflict. And if you understand the Masked Minotaur, you have a villain and a relationship between that villain and your lead character, all in place. You can go legions with just that conflict dynamic.
Right. I'm so glad that you mentioned the Masked Minotaur again, because oftentimes on this podcast, we speak about how we feel like the villains are just overlooked. Like, they're so often, it seems like the villains simply exist to be a roadblock for the hero instead of having their own motive or their own thoughts. I think that traditionally speaking, it works so well if they just happen to naturally come across one another because their paths are going to cross because of what their goals and intentions are, versus having the villain simply exist to be a threat to the hero. Like, when the villain's whole purpose is to be a threat to the hero, it can be done well, and it has been done well. But I think more times than not, it's used as a tool for lazy storytelling.
You're totally right. I couldn't agree more. That is what I call an antagonist. Yeah. You've created a character that antagonizes, I think you used the word obstructs, just kind of roadblocks your protagonist. That's not that interesting. Why is Darth Vader interesting in Star Wars? This guy bats 1,000. He does not lose. He does not lose until Return of the Jedi. And even then, he doesn't lose. He takes down the Emperor before he goes down. This guy, so a villain is someone who is highly competent, who's very, very good, and they have an ethos. They have a system of ethics that works in the world. And this is important because it works, they're going to have some legitimacy in this world, even if right behind them is a wake of destruction. That's what makes them a villain. They're effective. They're good. They get the job done. People will follow this person because they get the job. So they have mastered the code of the native culture. Or if it's a hero's journey story, they're so effective at warfare that they're coming now for your culture. Here they come. So it's a distant dragon. It's a fearsome creature. They should be good at what they do. They should be able to defeat your hero at first, brush him aside, in fact, easily. Think about when Luke first faced Vader. He's toying with Luke. The second Luke accidentally bumps his shoulder in like 3 moves, Vader's got him. 1, 2, 3. All right, you're done.
Right.
So a villain is someone who has embodied this code and who operates in the world successfully despite this destructive wake behind them. To defeat these people should be a real challenge. So you're right. If they're just pulling on your ponytail and throwing, egging your car,
right.
That's not much of a person to overcome. That's more of like an annoying bully than a villain. So I think you're right on the money with that.
So with that being said, Douglas, let me ask you this, and this is just kind of be one final question to kind of wrap us up and take us home here.
Sure.
Yeah, and that is, so between like your 2 really big notable books that you have right now, you've written so much about heroines and about their journeys and about how we can all learn more about how to not only extrapolate information from these heroine-led stories, but also like for those who want to create or write, how to really imbue more of those positive traits or implements into those female-led characters. So for anyone who wants to get into writing, I know a few people myself who really want to write, what kind of tools, obviously Heroine's Labyrinth is a big tool, but what kind of tools would you recommend them to implement in order to improve the overall writing and thinking process?
Well, there are some other really good books out there. The Writer's Journey by Christopher Vogler, I think I wouldn't, if you really care about the writing process, that's the book to read, because Joseph Campbell was not a screenwriter. He wasn't worried about telling stories. He was a comparative mythologist. So his book is academic, and it's written by an academic for academics. I have read it. It is very hard to read. I had to read paragraphs like 3 or 4 times before I felt I understood what he was talking about to some level. So I was like, whoa, man, I don't know who's reading this. But like it's really out there. But The Writer's Journey by Christopher Vogler, now you're talking my language. I could read through it and I'm like, oh my God. Oh, it gives me idea after idea. I understood what I could do. And what you want when you read a book, and this is what I hope the Heroine's Labyrinth does, is as you're reading, you're like, I can use that right now for oh my God, that's how I could set that. Like it should be able to trigger solutions to creative problems right away. That's what a good writing book will do. They should be practical and applicable, meaning you can use them. So The Writer's Journey is a good starting point. I'm totally not biased when I say The Heroine's Journey is a great book to read. What are some other good ones? I do think that understanding the hero's journey is important. Understanding archetypes is important because, you were talking about heroines, like trying to write great heroines. Sometimes movies today get caught up in optics. They want the heroine to look confident. So they just show you a confident heroine. Believe it or not, one of the secrets, vulnerability. Whether you're a hero or a heroine, they have to be vulnerable. They have to lose. Because you know what? When they start losing, you're like, oh man, I don't like that. I want this person to start winning. If you show them coming up and beating everybody up, remember what I said about Vader? He bats 1,000. This guy wins. And that's what makes him a villain. If you have a heroine who just wins,
right, then
they're almost villain-like in this case. They need to be put in check. You think of Indiana Jones, they always say, well, he was super powered. I'm like, I don't think so, man. That guy, that boxer comes out, just knocks him down. Indy did not look good in that fight.
I think about it like this, like Sarah Connor, if she's a badass in Terminator 1, then Terminator 2 doesn't even mean as much.
Totally.
I mean, to see that kind of glow up or that growth that she had from T1 to T2, it was understandable, it was reasonable, and I was like, wow, this character had, she's gone through it, and now look at it.
Well, and yeah, 100%. And in Terminator 2, she wasn't just OP there either. Like they gave her a new challenge. There's that whole scene where she goes to Miles Dyson's house, opens fire on the guy who invents, who is going to lead to Cyberdyne Systems reinventing the Terminator. Opens fire on him, almost kills him. I think that the little boy's remote control, which was a random event, he leans over and she just misses him, right?
Yeah.
She comes in, she's become a Terminator in that scene. And so now she faces the warrior's dilemma. This is why I don't think we should throw away the hero's journey, because the ethics of force are part of that. So even in her badass, T2 self, she still has crises. She still has lessons to learn. And she breaks down. She walks up, she's going to blow this guy away. And she breaks down and starts crying because she realizes she's gone way too far.
Yeah.
And so they have to come up with a plan B. So, even a badass has to have moments of self-doubt. They have to question what they're doing, and she has that. So vulnerability is the key to a great hero and heroine, because that's how we feel. That's us. We feel vulnerable a lot more than we let on, and when we see that in a big character, we're like hypnotized. We're like, what are they gonna do? How are they gonna solve this?
Right.
Because maybe I can take something from that,
So with that being said, Douglas, just to wrap things up here, and I promise for realsies this time.
Oh yeah, no worries.
The sequel to Faraway Bird, no rush here, but I'm really enjoying my read through. And whenever I get done with the book, so back here in my collection, I collect omnibus. All right, so that means that like an entire run in one book, because I hate reading an issue and then waiting a month for the next issue, and then waiting.
I know your pain.
I would much rather give me the whole run, and I'm gonna read it.
I gotcha.
When could we possibly expect to get the sequel to Faraway Bird?
I think the sequel will be out next year.
Oh, okay.
And I will. So what happened was, as I started writing the sequel back in right after Faraway Bird came out, but the Heroine's Labyrinth became such a thing for me, and I thought it was going to be a quick write, but it became this whole new project, which took 4 years. So that's a big gap for me. But when I finish part 2, I'm going right into writing part 3. So those books should come out back to back.
Nice.
So there will be a little bit of a wait. She does have quite an arc in Faraway Bird. And by the way, please reach out and tell me what you think when you finish it. If you do finish it, I would love to hear your thoughts on it.
Absolutely.
A few little secrets. You will see some of the fingerprints. Like she has a Luke Skywalker moment. There are. It was fun to take archetypes that you think of in movies that we've seen. There's an Obi-Wan Kenobi, moment in there. And this isn't historical fiction. I just repackaged it. This is what you're supposed to do with archetypes. Repackage it to fit the story. And someone like you will pick up on that. So that's why I'm curious what you think in the end, because it is hidden in there. But yeah, next year I think part 2 will come out, and then the following year part 3, and it should be a pretty epic trilogy that is based on historical fact.
I think that's absolutely awesome. I think you got some great works on your hand. I can't wait to finish Faraway Bird, and I for sure will let you know. I'd love to have you on again, maybe around the time of the release of the sequel. But also, I think that A Heroine's Journey is a tremendous tool in terms of like story writing content. I think that this is an amazing tool. But also, like, I'm someone who I just consume media. I'm not a writer. I don't have that gene in me, but I still think that this is awesome, even for me. I'm just someone who likes to interpret it and understand it. So I think that this is just a really awesome book that you've created here. Actually, both of them, obviously. So,
well, you mentioned that you thought about or do write. There's something, if you care enough to understand it, then there's something at work in there. This is my opinion. There must be some writer in there at work, secretly, because there's something motivating this understanding. It's compelling to you. So don't give up on it if you're thinking about it.
I'll say this: if there's a writer in here, man, he's struggling. And so he needs this book. Maybe that's what it is.
That's awesome.
Absolutely. Man. Douglas A. Burton, thank you so much for being here, man. I really had a blast with you on the Superhero Homies podcast. I would love to have you back again sometime. I hope you have as much fun as I had tonight.
Honestly, I had a blast talking with you. I would love to come on. Like I said, I don't even have to talk about the book. Like if you wanted to talk about a movie and I'm happy talking about that too. So, the worst thing I could ever be is someone cheaply plugging a book. I don't want to ever do that. I am definitely willing to talk about it because I actually think it's fun to talk about. But if a new movie comes out or an old movie, and they call it evergreen content. Yes. If there's anything that you think I'd be a good fit on, just let me know. I'd love to come on and talk with you and perhaps your co-host.
All right. You shouldn't have said that, but, it's recorded, so it's out there now.
I'm busted.
Well, homies, I hope you guys enjoyed this half as much as I did as well. This has been a blast. There's a lot coming down the pipeline, and as always, if you guys want to get added content or content soon, you can go to patreon.com/superherohomies, and for just $3 a month, you guys can support us and help us keep the lights on here and keep these microphones hot. And as always, if you guys have any kind of questions, comments, gifts, threats, food, supplies, you can hit us up at superherohomies@gmail.com or any of our social media outlets. We are always active, live, and listening. Douglas, is there any place where the homies listening can reach you at? And also, what's the best way for them to access your books?
So the book is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. It's pretty much anywhere books are sold, I think is how it's phrased. At some point, I want to make it into an audiobook because I am an audiobook guy. Faraway Bird is on audiobook. So yeah, if you are interested in historical fiction, Faraway Bird is a true story. Fictionalized account of Byzantine Empress Theodora. And if you are a writer or just interested in heroic women in fiction, the Heroine's Labyrinth is out there. I did pour my heart into it. It's a narrative arc for women, or I should say for female protagonists, and also for your male leads. It depends on your story. So you can find those there. You can also find me on my website, douglasaburton.com. If you go there, there's a cool little video where I was able to splice in movie scenes where you can see just a discussion of just the labyrinth, the first archetypal design. There's like 70 movies spliced into this 6-minute video. I love it. I'm proud of it. You can also find me on Twitter, and I am planning to start a YouTube channel for Douglas A. Burton next month. November 7th is our hopeful launch date.
Oh, that's awesome. Excellent. Well, there you have it, homies. Be sure to check out both Faraway Bird and A Heroine's Labyrinth. Those books are wherever you can get them, and as Mr. Burton just said, you can get Faraway Bird on Audible. So if your hands are busy during the day and your ears aren't, you have an option there. Well, that's going to be all for now, homies. Thank you guys again for listening in. We will see you all again soon, but until next time, this has been Douglas A. Burton, and my name is Superhero Homie Q. See you guys next time.